A young man goes missing after a date with someone he met online.
He had met a girl on Snapchat. I didn't know her.
Then he had not shown up for work.
He would have checked in with somebody. Deep down, I knew something was wrong.
When detectives get their first break in the case, they immediately suspect foul play.
I noticed blood on the tailgate. Looked like it had probably been washed out with a water hose.
There was also blood spattering on the back windshield.
In such a remote area, locating a body is a nearly impossible task.
There's actually hundreds of oil sites in the very rural areas of Jefferson Davis County.
They're very secluded, be a good place to commit a crime, and possibly there could be a dead body laying close to one of these well sites.
But when investigators follow the trail of evidence, it leads to a catfishing killer.
This is a case about a young man who met a girl and wanted an adventure, but it turns out that the girl had a sinister motive.
She lured this young gentleman.
He's driving the truck. Everybody is considered a suspect at that time.
How could she do it by herself?
September 6th, 2022. It's a Tuesday morning in the small town of Pearl, Mississippi, when Darlene Sistrunk arrives at the Rankin County Sheriff's Department to report her son Carson missing.
Darlene reported that they last saw Carson on the afternoon of Sunday, September 4th, and this was Labor Day weekend.
That particular weekend, I left with some friends to go to Texas to this wedding. He just told his dad he was just going out. He didn't say where he was going or who he was meeting or anything. He said, well, I love you and be careful. Monday morning, his dad got up and went on to work like normal, and he didn't really pay.
Darlene says that when Carson still hadn't checked in by that evening, she started to get concerned.
I waited till about 7:38, and I texted him. I said, are you on your way back home? And didn't get a response. I called, and there was no answer. It went to voicemail. So, of course, I was up all night long.
Because it was the Labor Day weekend, Carson did not have work on Monday.
Tuesday, Carson was supposed to be at work, so I called his friend that he worked with. He said, Carson is not here.
Darlene tells the deputy
Back on the transaction that Carson has made from yesterday. And they said, yeah, here's one for gas at New Hebron gas station. I hung up, and I said, in my mind, I said, we don't know anybody from New Hebron.
New Hebron is a tiny rural community located 51 miles south of Pearl. Bank records show the withdrawal occurred around 8:30 p.m. Sunday night, a few hours after Carson was last seen. That's when Darlene decided it was time to contact authorities. But by the time she arrived at the sheriff's office, she'd remembered something.
Carson had met a girl on Snapchat.
And just don't want to be contacted? Or is it that he needs help?
I think it was September 6th is whenever I was told that everyone was kind of looking for Carson. Deep down, I knew something was wrong, because just the way that Carson is, he would have checked in with somebody. Obviously, his phone was blowing up, right? You know, everybody's looking for him. He's not getting back with anybody.
I had a bad gut feeling. I just really started praying and just saying, you know, Carson, where are you?
Carson Monroe Sistrunk was born December 16, 1997 in Flowood, Mississippi.
I had 3 sons, and Carson was the baby of the 3. He was the smallest. He was bubbly, just a joy, you know. for us. He loved the outside, and as he grew older, my husband would take him hunting.
Carson's love of the outdoors was something he shared with his best friend, Tanner Gray.
Carson and I grew up outdoors. Whenever we got older, we would house sit actually a good bit for one of the guys in our church, and he has a setup out there, like a little range, and Carson and I would get the .22 pistol and shoot the target.
Although Carson was born the smallest of his brothers, by the time he was a teenager, he'd become larger than life.
I think it was kind of the joke that we just nicknamed him Little Man. You know, the dude stood at 6'4", right at 300 pounds. I mean, the guy was not a little man. We were able to make that joke with him because he was so tenderhearted.
He was a gentle giant. Yep. A teddy bear. When he graduated and he got his truck, we had Little Man put on the tag.
He had a Ford Raptor, and he loved it. You know, he loved to drive. That was his baby.
After graduating high school in 2016, Carson went off to college to pursue his passion.
Carson went to diesel mechanic school to be a welder, and he loved it. And then he also transitioned into being a gunsmith.
He would go to work at 7 and work to 3:30 at the welding place, and then leave there and then go to his gunsmith job.
He would build guns, he set up guns. He knew everything there was to know about a gun. So it was just cool to see him flourish in what he loved to do.
By 24, Carson seemed to already have his life figured out.
He had great parents, he had great friends. He had had a few previous relationships that didn't pan out. I think that made him kind of keep his cards close to him. He was a very private person. He may not say exactly where he was going or what he was doing, but if he's going to be gone for like a weekend or something, he would say, I'll be back, you know, this day.
Now, Carson's loved ones fear the worst due to his unusual silence.
When Miss Darlene came in and made her missing person report, she stated that there was a girl that Carson had met online.
Carson had told me that he had met a girl on Snapchat. And I said, oh, okay. And he had told me, he said that he had met her a couple of times. I didn't know her.
When there's a missing persons report, some of the first steps are to check hospitals, to check jails. All those leads came up with nothing. Law enforcement applied for an exigent circumstance warrant with the cell phone company to ping his last location. That location came up to New Hebron, Mississippi at the same general time as that last transaction with his credit card.
Rankin County sheriffs put out an alert on Carson's truck.
Carson drove a Ford Raptor. It was silver in color, and it had a very distinctive darker colored hood. It was just by happenstance that there was a sheriff with the Lawrence County Sheriff's Department that was in the area and happened to see the vehicle, and he called it in.
Sheriff's deputy actually saw that truck at the Old Hebron Grocery in Lawrence County.
But the deputy didn't see anyone matching Carson's description and waits for backup to avoid scaring potential witnesses away.
There are several individuals around the vehicle. Everybody is considered a suspect that's around that vehicle at that time until you can weed them out and find out what their connection is to Carson's trunk. Why were they there around that truck?
Coming up, investigators discover a shady transaction.
She said she purchased it from a man, and she gave the name that he went by as C Money.
And surveillance footage exposes Carson's last known location.
You could see a figure inside the passenger side, but you could not identify who it was.
While Carson's sistrunk remains missing, detectives have located his vehicle in New Hebron, Mississippi.
New Hebron, Mississippi is a very rural town. A lot of farmland. Oil and gas wells are very prevalent in that area.
When investigators arrive at the grocery store, they find a group of people gathered around the truck. One of them is a young woman.
She had the keys to the truck. There were several other people around who said she was the one who had been driving that truck.
She identified herself as Sierra Inscoe at that point.
Detectives ask Sierra if she's the woman Carson was supposed to meet. She claims to have no idea what they're talking about.
Sierra said that she did not know who Carson's sistrunk was.
Obviously, they asked about how she came to be in possession of this vehicle. She said that she bought it from somebody.
She produced a bill of sale-like document that she had purchased the truck for $16,000, and she said she purchased it from a man, and she gave the name that he went by as C Money.
However, a quick glance makes investigators question the legitimacy of the document.
Of course, you could look and tell that it was not a real bill of sale because it's just written on a piece of paper. The thing about it is you can't just discard that information and assume that she's lying about the transaction or about her story.
Sierra says she doesn't know C Money's real name or how the truck came into his possession. However, she reveals that he likely stole it based on their frightening interaction.
Sierra said that she had been threatened by him if she ever talked about anything, that he would kill her.
There was 3 males there with her at the truck. I got to find out what their connection is to Carson's sistrunk, if they knew Carson's sistrunk, what their connection is to Sierra Inscoe.
None of the men identify themselves as C Money, but they say Sierra has driven them around for the past few days. They recently met the 20-year-old at work as she just moved to the area.
I met Sierra through mutual friends. We'd be in classes together, and then we just, grew a friendship through that. She was a very nice person. She was very, tomboyish. She was the only girl on the football team in high school. She was a very well-known person, for sure, because she just had, a very big personality, so everybody knew of her. She was struggling, with her parents because she didn't have her mom in the picture, and then her dad wasn't home much either. She never stayed in school. Whenever she moved to Mississippi, we did not talk much at all. And she told me that she was going to be moving there for a welding job.
Sierra struggled to find stability and continued to move around, living with various friends and family.
She had lived in Florida. She lived in Tennessee. She stayed with her mother on very few occasions, who lived there in the northwest side of Jeff Davis County. Some of the farmers, the chicken farmers up in that area, she'll work for them. Sometimes she'll stay at some of their trailers on their property. We're trying to determine where Sierra really hung out a lot and stayed, but she was a drifter.
Unfamiliar with the new face in town, investigators bring Sierra Inscoe into the Rankin County Sheriff's Office for a formal interview to learn more about her and the vehicle purchase.
Sierra was picked up by the Rankin County Sheriff's Office investigators, and they also took the truck with them.
Sierra says the last place she and her friends went was an old oil well in Jefferson Davis County.
There's actually hundreds of oil sites in the very rural areas of Jefferson Davis County.
She said that her and some of her friends like to go to these gas well locations and party and smoke weed and stuff like that.
Detectives find her story suspicious, so they ask her to show them the oil wells she and her friends went to.
The gas wells are small little plots of dirt that usually square. There may be a piece of pipe sticking out of the ground with some valves on it and a few tanks on the side.
Sierra reluctantly agrees, but detectives' suspicions grow when she suddenly seems to forget where she went.
She kept on redirecting every time she could. Instead of pointing to the actual oil site, she pointed them to another one. And that was one of those rabbit trails that was very frustrating to law enforcement.
After several miscues, Sierra finally guides investigators to a remote well. After a brief search, they find evidence it's the correct place.
We actually brought Carson's vehicle down to the well site. It was on a wrecker, on a rollback wrecker.
In fact, the tire trucks that were at that oil site matched Carson's truck.
Considering Sierra's strange behavior, detectives wonder if she knows what really happened here.
The gas wells, they're very secluded. They're surrounded by trees. Be a good place to commit a crime. And possibly there could be a dead body laying close to one of these well sites.
Carson Sistrunk has been missing for over 48 hours. And while Sierra Inscoe claims she doesn't know where he is, investigators suspect she's lying. To aid in their ongoing search, the New Hebron Sheriff's Department enlists the aid of the Mississippi Bureau of Investigations.
We've come in to assist when called upon by the local sheriff's offices or police departments. When I got the call, it was a little after midnight on the 7th of September, 2022. The truck had been placed on a flatbed wrecker. When I walked by the truck with my flashlight, I just shined the light on the truck just to look at it.
With the new perspective, Agent Riley notices something alarming.
I noticed blood on the bottom of the tailgate. You could see the remnants of blood inside the truck in the cracks, some debris that was back there. Looked like it had probably been washed out with a water hose at some point. And up under the truck, there was a large amount of what appeared to be blood on the underside of the bed and on top of the spare tire. I knew that something bad had happened to somebody or something.
When asked about the blood, Sierra has a seemingly innocent explanation.
Miss Inscoe claimed that she'd hit a deer and had thrown it in the back of the truck. That's where the blood came from.
But with no collision damage to the truck, detectives find that difficult to believe.
She was actually detained and taken back to Rankin County.
While Sierra is taken into custody, Agent Riley calls one of the Bureau's forensic units to the scene.
In the course of their documenting this vehicle, they found some bags that contained clothes in the back of the vehicle. Those clothes would traditionally have been worn by a female. It appeared that there was some blood spatter on those clothes.
They took samples from inside the truck, from in the bed of the truck, underneath the truck, and did their job very well. And all that stuff was taken to the crime lab and to a DNA lab in Jackson.
There was also blood spattering on the back windshield of the truck. And what that implied to law enforcement that somebody had been sitting in the back of the truck, could very well have been shot.
By the time the inspection is complete, it's morning, and investigators have enough light to search the area for any sign of Carson.
I took my metal detectors up there, and we searched that whole well site area to see if we could locate any shell casings.
They searched extensively for any other evidence, but found nothing. They couldn't find anything other than those tire tracks.
Sierra seemed to be real deceptive in her answers. It really wastes a lot of time when a suspect tells you a story that's not true.
It occurs to Agent Riley that if their suspicions about Sierra are correct, she could have easily led them to the wrong oil site to throw them off.
I got to thinking about what Miss Inscoe had said several hours earlier about her frequenting these gas well locations, and that led me to believe that she was familiar with a lot of them. So I called a friend of mine who checking and reading the meters and stuff on them on a daily basis. I called him and I said, look, please have your guys that's checking these wells, have them all over the next couple of days, be real observant, be watching for things out of the ordinary. And within 15 or 20 minutes, he called me and said one of his drivers had just found a body.
Coming up, detectives confirm Sierra has been lying to them.
She didn't have a job. She shouldn't have money to have a truck like it.
But is it proof she committed murder?
She stuck with her story.
C-Money was probably the most wanted man in southeast Mississippi.
After 3 days missing, a body matching Carson Sistrunk's description has been located at an oil well site in New Hebron. Investigators immediately drive out to the second site, which is located a few miles away.
It's a dirt road, and as you get on top of the well site area, you can see tracks, and they stop, and then they back up into a bunch of kudzu vines. And that's where the body was laying.
Decomposition was very bad. There was maggots on the body, flies, and you could tell it had been there for a couple of days.
It's full-fledged summer in September here, and with the heat, it's not uncommon that a body could decompose in 2.5, 3 days.
The damage to the body makes it nearly impossible to determine cause of death or to make a positive ID.
I was pretty confident that that was Carson Sistrunk's body laying there, but without confirmation from the state medical examiner, I couldn't say that.
Everything was collected, put in body bags, and turned over to the coroner and sent to the crime lab.
Once we found the body, we had good reason to believe that it was a homicide. That's when I knew I had to question Miss Inscoe some more to try to figure out the truth of what happened.
While the body is transported to the state medical examiner's office, investigators return to Rankin County to interrogate Sierra Inscoe.
She stuck to her story that she had told the investigators earlier that day. Oh, no Carson Sistrunk. I've never seen Carson Sistrunk. I don't know anything about a body. You got the wrong person.
Law enforcement did not have any concrete evidence to show that Sierra stole the truck. It could very well have been that somebody gave Sierra the keys and she had the truck in good faith.
We conferred with the district attorney's office, and they said we did not have enough information to hold her. That's when we really had to release her from jail. It's frustrating, but you have to run every lead down.
Detectives need solid evidence to refute Sierra's story, so they go back to the one place they know both she and Carson had been.
Carson's last credit card transaction was at an ATM at a New Hebron Quick Stop gas station, and that was done at 8:39 p.m.
We talked to the owner of the store, found the video footage of the day and time in question.
The video footage was captured on Sunday, September the 4th, a little after 8 p.m. And lo and behold, there it is. He's driving the truck.
As Carson pulls up to a gas pump, investigators see he isn't alone.
There's a glare on the windshield and off the hood of the truck, and you could see a figure inside the passenger side, but you could not identify who it was. He gets out, comes inside, uses his debit card.
It was tremendous for us to be able to look and to verify the same clothing that Carson had on was the same clothing that was on the body we found at that well site.
While Carson pays for the gas inside, a different man approaches the truck.
What I noticed immediately was that the male subject that came up to the passenger in Mr. Sistrung's vehicle, it was obvious that they knew each other. You could tell by his body language, and they talked for probably a minute or so.
The biggest question for investigators at this point is who is sitting in the front seat of Carson's truck. Sierra, she said that a guy named C Money sold her the truck. So law enforcement wanted to check to see if this guy in the surveillance video was actually C Money.
We were able to locate the person, the male subject, by showing the video footage to some people in the area. And his name was Curly.
This man frequented that area. Once they found Curly, they showed him a copy of the surveillance video, and he was able to identify the person sitting in the front seat of Carson's vehicle as Sierra Inscoe.
Curly said that he knew Sierra Inscoe personally. They had dated in the past, and he was very adamant that that's who it was in the truck.
Despite the connection, Curly says he isn't the C Money they're looking for.
After we identified him and knowing his background and everything, we ruled him out pretty quick.
But his statement, combined with the surveillance video, gives detectives proof that Sierra lied to them.
Once we identified Miss Inscoe as being in the truck with Carson at the Quick Stop, she was our prime suspect.
Speaking with locals on the party scene, investigators track down some acquaintances who knew Sierra and ask what they know.
According to some eyewitnesses, they had seen Mr. Sistrunk with her before, a couple of weeks prior to him being murdered.
The investigators have some friends saying that she was going to get a new vehicle before her birthday, and all of a sudden, she's riding around in one.
The people we interviewed said that they knew she didn't have a job, she shouldn't have money to have a truck like that, and it kind of made them nervous because they didn't think she had, actually bought the truck.
Some of the people investigators spoke to reported seeing blood in the bed of the truck. And when they asked Sierra what happened, she told different people different stories.
She claimed she had a deer, she had a dog, she had a hog. I think she told somebody that even the person that owned the truck's sister had hit a deer.
Sierra had showed up Sunday night late and wanted to rinse out the truck.
She seemed to be acting strange, acting different, like she hadn't acted a few days before.
They knew something was up. They didn't want to get in it. They didn't want to get near it. Everybody was on to her and wanted no part of it.
The circumstantial evidence against Sierra Inscoe is growing by the minute. But it's not yet enough to charge her with murder.
For an investigator to have enough evidence to obtain a murder warrant for anybody, you at least need to know how they died. We had to get the autopsy completed. The state medical examiner's office performed an autopsy.
The cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds, 2 to the chest and 1 to the head, and every one of them had a slightly upward trajectory. He had to be above the gun.
The bullet that came from the body was in fragments. The only thing that they were able to determine was that it came from a 9mm gun.
Identifying the body is more difficult, but the medical examiner is able to lift a clear fingerprint.
The victim was identified as Carson Sistrunk. And once those fingerprints came back as him, then the charges were taken out.
It was unthinkable. We can't still wrap our head around what happened and how it happened, you know.
2 days after her release, authorities are now armed with an arrest warrant for Sierra Inscoe.
I went to an address in Jones County, Mississippi, along with several other agents. We surrounded the house. She came out with her hands up. It was a very uneventful arrest, thank goodness.
I didn't really believe it at first, but then I was like, wow, like, I guess this is possible. I do think that she was capable of doing it for attention.
On the day of the arrest, she wanted to talk to me again.
Once again, Sierra claims she bought the truck from the mysterious C Money. But this time, she gives detectives more to go on.
She said his first name was Corey, but she didn't know his last name, that he got orders to move dope and do things, that there was gang affiliations.
Although she's lied to them before, investigators consider the possibility that she's giving them an accomplice.
Carson was a very above average size. I don't think there'd be any way that she would be able to lift his body into the bed of the truck by herself.
C Money was probably the most wanted man in southeast Mississippi for the next 7 to 14 days.
I sought out other state agencies' help, Bureau of Narcotics, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, FBI. Nobody could identify this person.
We all made the decision that, it's a fictitious person. He doesn't exist, and we just stopped chasing that rabbit hole.
None of Sierra's local friends seem to have helped her either.
All their alibis checked out. We had ruled out any other suspects with the exception of Miss Inscoe.
How did she do it by herself? And that was a question that we wrestled with for a while.
Hoping for another link between Sierra and Carson, investigators obtain a search warrant for Sierra's social media accounts.
We were able to obtain the Snapchat records, which showed that there was communication between his account and her account. The gist of the conversation was Carson stated, "I'm going to be leaving soon, maybe a little late," and then her response was something along the lines of, "Okay."
I believe that Miss Inscoe lured Carson Sistrunk to a location in New Hebron. When they met, they traveled from that location to the place that we found him at that gas well site. I believe they were just going there to have a good time.
I don't know if he could have taken her out and maybe showed her how to shoot a gun. He carried a gun in the side of the truck. And then he also had like a small little pistol in the console that he carried.
Based on the forensic analysis of the truck, it looks as if that Carson was probably sitting on the tailgate of the truck and that Sierra was on the ground. Something happened. She took his gun and she shot him.
The trajectories of those shots were slightly upward, indicated to us that he was most likely sitting on the tailgate of the vehicle when he was shot, and then he fell into the back of the vehicle.
I believe she backed the truck up real quick, slammed on brakes, he fell out, and she took off.
Forensic testing confirms investigators' theory about the shooting.
The blood that was sent off for DNA analysis, the blood that was on the truck belonged to Carson's sister. The spots on the clothes inside the truck were verified to be blood, and that was also Carson's blood.
After analysis by the crime lab, it was confirmed that the DNA on the clothes we found in the truck came back to Sierra Inscoe.
Now it's up to prosecutors to convince a jury that the 21-year-old young woman turned into a murderer.
When you get to a trial, you have to build that case to a jury. In a murder case, you don't have that victim to talk. You have to talk for them. It's my job to paint that picture for the jury.
After a years-long investigation, the evidence seems to prove Sierra Inscoe is the one who murdered Carson Sistrunk. The question now facing prosecutors is why. They believe the answer is greed.
This is a case about a young man who met a girl and wanted an adventure, and it turns out that the girl that he thought was fun had a sinister motive. She had told many people that she was going to have a truck by her birthday, and he had a very nice truck.
I just think she felt unloved and that she was trying to, find a connection with somebody. She was trying so hard to have friends and fit in everywhere, and it just wasn't working out. So she was trying to gain these things in order to fit in properly and stuff, and I guess the truck was one of them.
Miss Inscoe lured this young gentleman, good home life, good parents, involved in the church, and she took all that away from him just for his truck. I mean, what normal person would even think to do that?
The trial is scheduled for July 2024, nearly 2 years after Carson was murdered. But the case never makes it to court.
Ultimately, she pled guilty to second-degree murder.
Didn't really shock me because of the multitude of evidence that we had against her.
She was imposed with 40 years in the Mississippi Department of Corrections. 5 of those years is suspended. She has to serve 35, and then those 5 years will be served on post-release supervision. There is also no doubt that she will serve every day of that 35 years.
During her plea hearing, Sierra is offered the opportunity to speak directly to Carson's family.
She gave an allocution that lasted 10 minutes, and I'll never forget, she opened with, "I did it, I'm sorry, I killed him." And that was the first time that anybody had ever heard those words out of her mouth.
She cried. She begged the family for forgiveness, that she didn't know why she did it, that she acted alone, that no one else was with her.
I feel like justice was served to her. I feel like that she should have gotten life, but she will serve what she was given.
I think Sierra snapped because she was trying to keep up to a certain standard. She was trying to keep up with all the lies that she was telling. She was trying to, be a person she wasn't.
Miss Inscoe ultimately took Carson Sistrunk's life to take his truck to show off to her buddies. That just shows you how evil Miss Inscoe is.
But I think the lesson to take away from this case would probably be, to be very wary about who you place your trust in, especially in the world we live in today where we can instantly connect with people hundreds of miles away. People just need to be careful.
Carson was loved, by a lot of people. There was over 700 people that came to the memorial service.
Man, Carson would love to see this. How much support he has. Being a pallbearer at your best friend's funeral it's tough. You've spent your whole life together, and now you're carrying him to his grave, where he's going to stay for the rest of eternity. Carson had that way about him that drew people in. It was that sweet, tender spirit. He was the best of us. I think just having someone in your life like Carson, you were blessed. If I could say something to Carson right now, it'd be, I miss you. I miss you, Bubba. I miss you every day.
It was a joy.
It begins with a sound no one remembers hearing. Not a scream, not a crash, not even a struggle. Just silence, the kind that settles into a room and stays there long after something has gone terribly wrong. New York, late autumn, 1987. The city never really sleeps, but there are moments, thin, fragile moments, when entire blocks seem to exhale at once. Street lights hum. Windows glow faintly. Radios murmur behind walls. And somewhere in Queens, on a narrow residential street lined with identical houses and parked sedans dusted in yellow streetlight, something happens that no one sees and no one hears. At 12:14 a.m., a call comes in. The dispatcher will later describe the voice as unsteady, like it didn't belong to the person speaking. Words repeat, stumble, collapse into each other. A door. Open. Lights still on. She should be here. By the time patrol arrives, the neighborhood is awake in the quietest way possible. Curtains shifting, silhouettes watching from behind glass, the distant echo of a police radio cutting through the night air. Nothing looks broken. Nothing looks disturbed. And yet, from the moment the officers step onto the porch, there's a tension that doesn't belong to an ordinary missing person call. The front door isn't locked. Inside, everything is exactly where it should be and exactly where it shouldn't. A television flickers in the living room, casting a pale, restless glow across untouched furniture. The volume is low, just enough to suggest someone had been watching, had been present minutes, maybe seconds before everything stopped making sense. A cup of coffee sits on the kitchen counter, steam no longer rising, but the surface still warm to the touch. A chair slightly angled away from the table, as if someone had just stood up or had been interrupted mid-motion. Upstairs, the bedroom tells a quieter story. The bed is unmade, but not violently so. Sheets folded back, one corner creased deeper than the rest. A closet door left half open. One shoe on the floor, lying on its side. The other still in place by the bed. There are no signs of struggle. No overturned furniture. No shattered glass. No blood. No noise reported by neighbors. Just absence. Her name won't matter at first. Not to the headlines. Not to the public. She is described in clean, efficient terms. 26 years old, stable job, no known enemies, routine life. The kind of person who exists quietly inside a city too large to notice her, until suddenly, it does. Woman vanishes overnight. Queen's disappearance stuns neighborhood. Police find no signs of forced entry. The words begin to circulate, but they don't stick. Not yet. There's nothing to hold on to. No violence. No spectacle. Just a missing person in a city that swallows thousands of stories every year. But inside the house, the details begin to collect. The back door is unlocked. It shouldn't be. Friends will say she was careful. Habitual. The kind of person who checks locks twice before bed. The kind of person who doesn't leave doors open in the middle of the night. And yet there it is. Not broken. Not tampered with. Just unlocked. A decision. Or a mistake. Or an invitation. Detectives arrive before dawn, their presence shifting the atmosphere from confusion to calculation. Gloves. Cameras. Evidence bags. Every surface becomes a question. Every object, a possibility. They move through the house slowly, deliberately, as if the answer might reveal itself if they don't rush. It doesn't. Fingerprints match the expected patterns, hers, a few from friends and family, nothing out of place. No unknown prints. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of a struggle. It's too clean. And that's what makes it wrong. Because something happened here. Something significant enough to remove a person entirely from their own life without leaving behind a single clear trace. Neighbors are questioned. Most heard nothing. One recalls seeing a light on later than usual. Another mentions a car passing slowly around midnight, but can't describe it. No license plate. No color. Just a shape in the dark. The timeline begins to stretch thin. Last confirmed sighting. Earlier that evening. Routine. Unremarkable. She returned home. Nothing unusual. No reported calls. No scheduled visits. No plans that would explain why she might open the door after midnight or leave without taking anything with her. Her purse is still inside. Her keys. Her coat. Everything that suggests movement is still here. Except her. Days pass. Then weeks. The case begins to shift, almost imperceptibly, from urgent to uncertain. Missing persons flyers appear on telephone poles, in shop windows, on subway walls. Her face becomes a question people glance at and move past. But inside the investigation, something else is happening. Patterns are failing to form. Every case has a shape, domestic, random, planned, impulsive. But this one refuses to settle. There's no forced entry, which suggests familiarity, but no evidence of interaction. No struggle, which suggests compliance, but no reason for it. No witnesses. No trail. It doesn't behave like a crime. And that makes it worse. Because the absence of evidence doesn't point in one direction. It points everywhere at once. Then comes the detail that almost doesn't make it into the report. A name. It surfaces in a casual conversation with a coworker. Mentioned briefly. Someone she had spoken to recently. Not a close friend. Not a known associate. Just someone new. A name without weight. Without context. At first, it means nothing. But when detectives attempt to follow it, it doesn't lead where it should. No consistent address. No stable employment. Records that exist, but don't align. Different people remember different details, height, age, voice. It's as if the person exists in fragments, never fully solid, never entirely absent. A shadow with a name. And suddenly, the case tightens. Because now there is something, however small, that doesn't fit into the clean, quiet narrative of a woman who simply disappeared. Now there is a possibility. Not proof. Not even suspicion strong enough to act on. But enough to disturb the balance. If she knew him, why no signs of struggle? If she didn't, how did he get close enough to matter? Detectives revisit the house. Re-examine the timeline. Re-interview witnesses. The same questions asked again, hoping for a different answer. Nothing changes. The back door remains the only physical anomaly. Unlocked. Unexplained. Months turn into a year. The case begins to cool, not officially, not yet, but in the way resources shift, attention drifts, urgency fades. New cases come in. Louder cases. Bloodier cases. Cases with evidence that points somewhere, anywhere. This one doesn't move. The file grows thicker, heavier, filled with notes that circle back on themselves. Leads that dissolve. Statements that contradict. The name, always there, always unresolved, sits like a loose thread no one can pull without unraveling everything. And slowly, quietly, the words begin to appear in internal conversations. Cold case. Not declared. Not finalized. But understood. Time is no longer an ally. Evidence doesn't improve with age. Memories don't sharpen. People move. They forget. They change. And whatever happened in that house that night begins to sink beneath layers of distance and silence. But it never disappears. Because cases like this don't end. They linger. In the precinct, in the neighborhood, in the quiet unease of a house that eventually changes hands but never quite loses its history. People talk, but only in fragments. A disappearance. No clues. Something not right. And somewhere, buried inside boxes of reports and photographs, that name remains. Waiting. Because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it shifts. A detail overlooked. A piece of evidence re-examined. A voice that stayed silent for too long. And when it doesn't return gently. It crashes back. Years later. Decades even. With answers no one was prepared to hear. And for one case in New York, 1987, the silence that began that night was only the beginning of something far more unsettling. Because the truth wasn't gone. It was waiting. Time does something strange to unsolved cases. It doesn't erase them. It distorts them. Details blur. Memories soften. Certainties dissolve into speculation. And yet, at the center of it all, there's always something that refuses to change. A fixed point. A moment in time that remains untouched, like a photograph that never fades. For this case, that moment is still the same.
A door.
Unlocked. A room. Undisturbed. A life. Interrupted. Weeks after the disappearance, the investigation begins to narrow. Not because there are too many leads, but because there are almost none. Detectives circle the same fragments again and again, pressing harder, looking for inconsistencies, for cracks, for anything that might give the case shape. And that's when the name comes back. Not loudly, not dramatically, just persistently. It appears in notes, in transcripts, in the margins of reports. A detail too thin to hold, but too strange to ignore. The man no one seems to remember clearly, but everyone recalls just enough to make him real. Detectives begin reconstructing him the only way they can through contradictions. One coworker insists he had a calm voice, soft, almost careful. Another remembers him speaking quickly, nervously, like he didn't want to stay in one place too long. Someone describes dark hair. Someone else swears it was lighter. One says he seemed older, maybe mid-30s. Another places him closer to her age. No photographs. No confirmed address. No consistent identity. It's as if he existed only in passing moments, never long enough to leave a clear impression. But there is one detail that doesn't shift. He knew her name, and she knew his. That alone is enough to push the investigation forward. Detectives expand their search, reaching beyond immediate circles. Phone logs are re-examined, not just for calls made, but for patterns. Numbers dialed briefly, connections that lasted seconds, anything that might suggest contact that wasn't meant to be noticed. And there it is. A number. Unlisted. Called once. Less than a minute. No message left. No record of a return call. It sits there, almost invisible, buried among routine entries. But in a case where nothing exists, even the smallest anomaly becomes a signal. They trace it, or try to. The number leads to a payphone. Not unusual for the time. Not immediately suspicious. But the location, that's where things begin to shift again. It's not near her home. Not near her workplace. Not near anywhere she's known to frequent. It's out of place.
And more importantly, it's gone.
By the time investigators arrive, the payphone has already been removed. Replaced. Records incomplete. Maintenance logs missing key details. The trail, if it was ever clear, is already breaking apart. Another dead end. Or something designed to become one. Frustration builds inside the investigation team. Not openly, not dramatically, but in the quiet ways. Longer hours, shorter tempers, conversations that end without resolution. The kind of case that doesn't just resist answers, it resists direction. And then something else surfaces. A witness. Not new, just overlooked. An older woman from 2 houses down. Initially interviewed in the first days, her statement filed and forgotten among dozens of others that seemed to offer nothing useful. But now, revisited under a different lens, her memory shifts from irrelevant to unsettling. She didn't hear anything, but she saw something. A man, standing near the side of the house.
Late.
Too late for someone to be there without reason. She describes him, simply. Average height, dark jacket, face partially obscured by shadow. Not moving much.
just standing.
watching. At the time, it didn't strike her as urgent. New York has a way of normalizing the unusual. People linger. People wait. People exist in spaces that don't always make sense. But now, placed back into the timeline, it becomes something else. Because she remembers one more detail. He wasn't looking at the street. He was looking at the house. At her house. And he stayed there longer than anyone should. Detectives press her for more, but memory has limits. She can't describe his face. Can't recall which direction he came from. Can't say when exactly he left. Only that he was there. And then he wasn't. It aligns too closely with the only confirmed window of disappearance to be ignored. Now, the case has something it didn't have before. Not evidence, but presence. A figure. A possibility that someone had been there, waiting before anything happened inside that house. And suddenly, the unlocked door feels different. Less like a mistake. More like a moment. Because doors don't just unlock themselves. They are opened.
By choice.
Or by trust. Or by deception. The investigation leans harder into the idea that this wasn't random. That whoever entered that house did so without force, without resistance, without urgency. Which means one thing. She let them in. Or believed she should. And that brings the name back into focus. Not as a fragment, but as a center. Detectives began attempting to build him again, this time more aggressively. Cross-referencing databases. Looking for partial matches. Anyone with a similar name, a similar pattern of movement, a similar absence of consistency. They find possibilities.
Too many.
Men who drift between addresses. Men who work under different names. Men who leave behind just enough information to exist, but not enough to be tracked. One stands out. Not because he matches perfectly, but because he doesn't. His records are incomplete in ways that don't align with simple oversight. Employment gaps that don't make sense. Addresses that overlap with others. Identification that appears valid until examined closely. A man who exists but only just. They bring him in. Routine questioning. Nothing formal. Nothing accusatory. He cooperates.
Calm.
Measured. Almost indifferent. He acknowledges knowing her. Briefly.
Casually.
Nothing significant. He claims they spoke a few times. Nothing more. No visits. No late-night meetings. No reason to be near her house. His timeline holds. Mostly. No clear contradictions. No direct evidence placing him at the scene. No witness who can identify him definitively as the man outside. Just a feeling. The kind that doesn't belong in official reports.
Detectives push where they can.
Ask the same questions in different ways. Look for hesitation. For cracks. For anything that suggests he's holding something back. But he doesn't break. Because there's nothing to break against. No evidence. No proof. Just a name and a presence that can't be pinned down. Eventually, they let him go. Not because they're convinced, but because they have no choice. And just like that, the closest thing they have to a suspect disappears back into the city. The case stalls again. Months pass. Then years. The file is archived, but not closed. Moved, but not forgotten. It becomes one of those cases detectives mention in quiet conversations, the ones that don't sit right, the ones that should have been solvable, the ones that feel like they're missing something obvious that no one can see. The house changes owners. The neighborhood moves on. The city keeps moving, as it always does. But the absence remains. Because no body is ever found. No confession ever made. No answer ever given. Only a door. Unlocked. And a man who may, or may not, have stood in the shadows just long enough to change everything. And somewhere in the background, quietly, almost imperceptibly, the case begins to wait. Because time doesn't always bury the truth. Sometimes. It preserves it. Years don't pass quietly in a city like New York. They stack. Layer upon layer of noise, construction, new faces, new crimes, new headlines screaming for attention. And somewhere beneath all of it, older stories begin to sink, not gone, not erased, just buried under the weight of everything that came after. But some cases don't stay buried. They shift.
Subtly.
Without warning. And when they do, it's never because of something obvious. It's never the dramatic discovery people expect. It's smaller than that. Quieter. A detail overlooked. A piece of evidence that didn't matter until it did. For this case, that shift begins almost 2 decades later. Not with a confession. Not with a witness coming forward, but with a box. A storage box, misfiled during a departmental reorganization. Old cases being digitized, transferred, categorized. Paper turning into data. Ink into pixels. Names and dates reduced to searchable entries in a system that didn't exist when the case first opened. Routine. Administrative. Forgettable. Until someone opens the wrong file. Or maybe the right one. Inside, everything is exactly as it was left. Photographs, reports, transcripts, notes scribbled in margins that no longer have context. A frozen investigation, untouched by time except for the slow yellowing of paper. And at the center of it all, the same problem. No evidence of entry. No sign of struggle. No trace of where she went.
But now, the world has changed.
Technology has changed. And evidence that once meant nothing suddenly has a voice. The coffee cup. It had been collected, bagged,
Stored.
examined at the time for prints. Nothing unusual found. It became just another object in a room full of objects that didn't explain anything. But now it's different. Because now there's DNA. Not the kind investigators relied on in the late 80s. Not partial. Not unreliable. Advanced. Refined. Capable of pulling identity from the smallest trace, from contact so brief it wouldn't have registered before. The cup is tested again.
Carefully. Precisely. And this time it answers.
2 profiles. One matches her. The other doesn't. At first, that alone isn't shocking. Homes contain traces of multiple people. Friends visit. Objects are shared. Contact happens. But when the second profile is run through the system, it hits nothing. No match. No record. No criminal history. No database entry. Just a sequence. Unknown. And suddenly, the past begins to move. Because that second profile shouldn't exist without a story. Someone was there. Close enough to touch what she touched. Close enough to leave behind something that lasted decades. And yet invisible. Detectives reopen the case. Not quietly. Not cautiously. But with the kind of urgency reserved for something that finally feels real. The house is revisited. Not the same house, not really. Renovated. Changed. New owners. New furniture. But beneath it, the structure remains. The layout. The angles. The spaces where something once happened. They walk through it again. Reconstruct. Reimagine. Try to place the unknown inside a space that has long since moved on. And again, the same question rises. Why no struggle? Because DNA confirms presence. But presence doesn't explain behavior. Someone was there. But she didn't fight. Didn't resist. Didn't leave a single sign that something was wrong. And that brings everything back to one possibility investigators had never been able to prove. She let them in. Or believed she should. The unknown profile becomes the center of everything. It's compared against old records, old suspects, old possibilities. And that's when something unexpected happens. It almost matches. Not perfectly, but close enough to matter. A partial alignment. Not with a convicted criminal. Not with anyone in the original investigation. But with a sample taken years later in an unrelated case. Different borough. Different crime. Different victim. But the same absence of noise. The same lack of forced entry. The same disappearance without a trace. It's not enough to confirm, but it's enough to connect. And once that connection exists, everything changes. Because now this isn't one case. It's a pattern. Or at least the possibility of one. Investigators begin pulling files. Old disappearances. Unresolved. Quiet cases that never made headlines. Cases that looked clean too clean. They find similarities. Not identical, but close. Women living alone. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of struggle.
No bodies.
Just absence. And suddenly, the question isn't just what happened that night in 1987. It's how many times it may have happened, and how long someone may have been doing it without ever being seen clearly enough to be caught. The name from the original file resurfaces. Stronger now. More dangerous. Because now, it isn't just a vague memory. It's a potential link. They track him again. Or try to. But time has done what time always does. Records fade. People move. Identities shift. The man they once questioned no longer exists in any straightforward way. No current address. No recent employment. No clear trail. Just fragments. Old records. Old references. Old inconsistencies that now feel less like coincidence and more like design. They dig deeper. Financial records. Aliases. Connections to places tied to the newer cases. And slowly a shape begins to form. Not a clear one. Not enough to arrest. But enough to suggest that the man they let walk away years ago may have been something they didn't fully understand at the time. Because in 1987, he was just a name. Now he's a possibility tied to something larger. Something deliberate. Something patient. And something that knew exactly how to leave nothing behind. Except one thing. DNA. The one detail he couldn't control. The one detail that didn't matter until it did. And now, decades later, it's the only thing that connects him to a room where everything else was silent. Investigators build the case slowly.
Carefully.
Because they've been here before. They know what it feels like to believe they're close and then lose everything. So this time, they don't rush. They reconstruct timelines. Re-interview anyone still alive who might remember something. Cross-check movements across years, across boroughs, across identities. And the pattern tightens. Not enough for the public. Not enough for certainty. But enough for them. Because now, for the first time, the case doesn't feel empty. It feels occupied. Like there was always someone there. Watching. Waiting. Moving through lives without leaving behind anything that could hold him in place.
Until now.
Because the past doesn't stay quiet forever. And the smallest trace is sometimes all it takes to make it speak. The case that once had nothing, now has something. And that something is beginning to point somewhere. Somewhere real. Somewhere dangerous. And somewhere that has been hidden.
For a very long time.
The moment a cold case begins to move again, everything changes. Not just the investigation. The tone. The weight. The silence that once surrounded it starts to crack, and beneath that silence, something else emerges. Pressure. Years of it. Decades. Every unanswered question compressing into a single, dangerous realization. This wasn't random. It never was. The DNA becomes the center of gravity. Everything else, statements, timelines, faded memories, begins to orbit around it. Because for the first time, there is something that doesn't depend on memory, doesn't weaken with time, doesn't change depending on who's telling the story. It's fixed. And it belongs to someone. Someone who was there. Close enough to touch what she touched. Close enough to exist in the only moment that matters. Investigators expand outward, but carefully.
They know the danger now.
Not of the suspect, but of certainty. Of believing too quickly. Of forcing connections where none exist. So they test everything. Again. The coffee cup. The kitchen surfaces.
Door handles.
Fragments of evidence that had been stored, untouched, for decades. And slowly, the picture sharpens. The unknown DNA isn't isolated. It appears again.
Faint. Partial.
But consistent. On the edge of a countertop. Near the back door. Not everywhere. Not careless. But present enough to confirm something critical. Movement. Whoever was inside that house didn't just stand still. They moved through it.
Calmly.
Deliberately. And without resistance. Because there are still no signs of struggle.
No defensive marks.
No disruption that suggests fear or urgency. Which leads to a conclusion that investigators can no longer avoid.
She wasn't taken by force.
She went with him. Or at least she didn't believe she had a reason not to. That realization shifts the entire psychological profile. This wasn't a break-in. It was an entry granted. Whether through trust, manipulation, or something more subtle, it was allowed. And that makes the unknown even more dangerous, because it suggests control, not physical, but psychological, the kind that doesn't leave marks, the kind that leaves doors unlocked. The name from the original file returns again, this time with weight it never had before. Because now, it isn't just a memory. It's a potential match. Not confirmed. Not yet. But closer than anything they've ever had. They reopen everything connected to him. Old interviews. Old statements. Even the way he spoke during questioning is reanalyzed. Tone, pacing, hesitation. Things that didn't matter before now feel like evidence hiding in plain sight. He had been calm. Too calm. Not defensive. Not overly cooperative. Just balanced. As if he understood exactly how much to say. And how much not to. At the time, it didn't stand out. Now it does. Because calmness, in the absence of pressure, can mean innocence. But calmness in the presence of something hidden can mean control. Investigators begin reconstructing his life, not as it was presented, but as it may have actually existed. And that's when the inconsistencies begin to stack. Addresses that overlap with time frames that don't align. Employment records that suggest presence in places where he shouldn't have been able to be.
Gaps.
Not random. Not chaotic. Structured. As if he moved just enough to avoid pattern, but not enough to disappear entirely. And that's when they find something that had been missed the first time. A vehicle. Not registered in his name, but linked to an address he once used.
Old.
Unremarkable, but present in a parking violation report from months before the disappearance. Location? 3 blocks from her house. It's not definitive, but it's enough. Because now there's proximity. Not just theoretical. Physical. He was close. Close enough to observe. Close enough to wait. Close enough to become part of a timeline that once had no one in it. They track the vehicle's history. Ownership transfers. Registrations. Names that shift, overlap, disappear. And through it all the same pattern emerges. Movement. Not random. Not impulsive. Measured. Like someone who understood how to exist without anchoring themselves anywhere for too long. And suddenly, the idea that this could have happened more than once stops feeling like speculation. It starts feeling like inevitability. Because people who operate this way don't do it once. They refine. They repeat. They learn what works and remove what doesn't. And in this case, what worked was silence. No forced entry.
No struggle.
No trace.
Until now.
Because the one thing that didn't matter then matters now. DNA. The smallest mistake. Or maybe not even a mistake. Just something that couldn't be controlled in a time when no one thought it would matter. Investigators build the case layer by layer. They don't confront him yet. Not again. Not until they have something that can't be explained away. Something that forces a reaction. Because they remember what happened last time.
He walked.
And if they move too soon, he could disappear again.
Completely.
So they wait. And while they wait, they expand. They look at the other cases. The ones that almost match. The ones with the same quiet endings. And slowly a pattern begins to take shape. Not perfect, but consistent enough to suggest something deeply unsettling. Women. Alone. No signs of forced entry.
No struggle. No bodies. Just gone.
Different boroughs. Different years. But the same absence. The same silence. And in some of those cases, evidence still exists.
Stored.
Forgotten. Waiting. They test it. One by one.
Carefully.
And then it happens. A match. Partial. But undeniable. The same unknown profile appears again. In another house. Another disappearance. Another night where nothing was heard and everything was lost. Now it's real. Not a theory. Not a possibility. A connection. And once that connection exists, the case explodes. Because this is no longer about one victim. Or one night. It's about a pattern that may have existed for years without ever being seen clearly enough to stop. And at the center of it, a man who was questioned once and allowed to walk away. The weight of that realization hits hard, not just professionally.
Personally,
Because this isn't just about solving something old. It's about understanding how close they were and how easily it slipped away. But now it's different. Now they have something that can't be ignored. Something that ties him not just to a name, but to a presence. A physical one. Inside spaces where he was never supposed to be. And this time they're not letting go. Because the silence that protected him for decades is starting to break. And when it does, it won't be quiet. It won't be controlled. It will be loud, unavoidable, and irreversible. Because the past is no longer willing to stay buried. And whatever has been hiding inside it is about to be dragged into the light. Once a pattern is confirmed, it stops being a mystery. It becomes a hunt. The shift is immediate, almost violent in its intensity. What was once a cold case, quiet, distant, suspended in time, now moves with urgency, with direction, with purpose. Investigators aren't asking what happened anymore. They're asking how many times. And more importantly, how long has he been out there? The second DNA match changes everything. It doesn't just validate the theory, it fractures the illusion that this was ever an isolated event. Two separate disappearances, years apart, connected by a presence that left almost nothing behind. Almost. Because what he didn't know, what no one knew back then, was that time would eventually betray him. And now it has. The investigation expands beyond its original boundaries. Old files are pulled from archives, not just within New York, but beyond. Neighboring states. Quiet towns. Places where disappearances didn't trigger headlines, where missing persons cases faded quickly into the background noise of everyday life. They look for the same signature. Not violence, not chaos, but the absence of both. Doors unlocked, homes undisturbed, lives interrupted mid-motion. It takes time, but the pattern begins to emerge more clearly now, like a photograph developing slowly in a dark room. 3 cases. Then 4. Then 5. Not identical. Not perfectly aligned. But close enough to make one thing undeniable. Someone had been doing this repeatedly. And doing it well. Because for years, decades, even no one had connected them. No one had seen the thread.
until now.
And at the center of that thread is a man who once sat in a chair across from detectives and walked away untouched. They rebuild his timeline again, this time not as a suspect in a single case, but as a potential constant across multiple disappearances. Where was he? When was he there? Who crossed paths with him and never returned? The answers don't come easily. Time has scattered the pieces. Records incomplete. Witnesses gone, or unwilling to revisit old memories. Addresses that lead nowhere. But slowly something begins to form. He moved. Constantly. Not in a way that drew attention, but enough to avoid roots. Short stays. Temporary work. Identities that almost matched, but never quite aligned. A man who lived in the margins. Not invisible, but never fully seen. And that's when investigators realized something else. This wasn't just movement. It was strategy. Because every time he appeared in a new place, the pattern followed. A disappearance.
Clean. Quiet.
Unexplained. And then he would leave. Before questions could form. Before suspicion could take shape.
Gone.
Like nothing had happened. Except something always had. They begin mapping it visually. A timeline stretched across years. Locations pinned. Movements traced. And when they step back, the picture is chilling. Because it doesn't look random. It looks intentional. Like someone choosing where to be.
And when. And who.
The psychological profile sharpens. This isn't impulsive behavior. It's controlled. Measured. Patient. The kind of patience that doesn't rush, doesn't panic, doesn't make unnecessary mistakes. Except one. DNA. The one thing he couldn't erase. The one thing that didn't matter until it did. And now it's following him. Across time. Across places. across lives he thought had disappeared with no trace. Investigators prepare to move forward, but they know they're dealing with someone who has avoided detection for decades. They can't afford a misstep, because if he senses pressure, if he feels even a hint of exposure, he could vanish again, and this time permanently. So they watch.
Quietly, carefully.
They track the fragments of his current identity, or what's left of it. A name surfaces, then shifts. An address appears, then disappears. Employment records that suggest stability until they don't. But eventually something holds. A location. Not temporary, not recent, but stable enough to matter. For the first time in decades, he has a place. And that changes everything. Surveillance begins. Not obvious, not aggressive, just present. Watching the way he moves, the way he interacts, the way he exists in a world that has unknowingly allowed him to pass through it for years.
He doesn't stand out.
That's the first thing they notice.
He blends. Completely.
Routine. Predictable. Almost ordinary. The kind of person you pass on the street and forget instantly. The kind of person neighbors would describe as quiet or keeps to himself. No signs of violence. No outward indication of anything abnormal. And that's what makes it worse. Because whatever he is, it doesn't show. Not on the surface. But investigators aren't looking at the surface anymore. They're looking at the pattern beneath it. And the pattern doesn't lie. They build the case piece by piece. DNA linking multiple scenes. Movement aligning with disappearances. Old inconsistencies that now feel like deliberate misdirection. And at the center of it all, the same man. Older now. Changed, perhaps. But still present. Still here. And still free. The decision to act doesn't come easily. Because once they move, there's no going back. No second chance. No room for doubt. They need enough. Not just to confront him, but to hold him. To force the truth out of a silence that has lasted decades. And even then, there's no guarantee. Because people like this don't confess easily. They don't break the way others do. They don't panic. They wait. They measure. They choose what to reveal and what to bury forever. But the investigation has reached a point where waiting becomes risk. Because every day he's free is another day where the pattern could continue. Even after all these years. Even now. So they prepare. Quietly. Thoroughly. Every detail reviewed. Every connection reinforced. Every possible weakness examined. Because they know one thing with certainty. This isn't just about solving the past. It's about stopping something that may never have truly ended. And when the moment comes, it won't be dramatic. It won't be loud. It will be precise. Calculated. Final. Because after decades of silence, after years of absence, of unanswered questions, of lives left suspended in uncertainty, the truth is no longer something they're searching for. It's something they're about to confront. Face to face. With a man who thought he had outrun time, but didn't. Because time doesn't forget. It waits. And when it catches up, it doesn't ask questions. It demands answers. The arrest doesn't begin with sirens. It begins with stillness. A quiet morning, ordinary in every way. The kind of morning that doesn't announce what it's about to become.
Cars passing.
Doors opening. Coffee being poured somewhere behind closed walls. And inside one of those walls, a man who has lived for decades without consequence moves through his routine, unaware that time has finally reached him. Surveillance has been running long enough now that nothing he does feels unpredictable anymore. Patterns repeat. Movements align. The illusion of randomness, gone. What remains is structure.
Predictability.
A life that appears simple on the surface, but beneath it, layered with something far more deliberate. Investigators have watched him leave for work, return, sit alone for long periods of time, interact minimally. No sudden movements, no erratic behavior, no visible signs of fear. If anything, he looks comfortable. And that's what makes the moment so precise. Because comfort breeds assumption. And assumption creates openings. The team moves before dawn. No spectacle. No unnecessary force. Just coordination. Quiet communication. Positions taken without drawing attention. The kind of operation designed not just to succeed, but to avoid giving him even a second to react. Because reaction is the only variable they can't control. And they know what's at stake. Decades of silence. Multiple lives. A pattern that has never been interrupted.
Until now.
They approach the residence carefully. Every detail accounted for. Every exit covered. No room for escape, not physically, not strategically. The knock on the door is firm. Measured. Final. For a moment nothing happens. Then movement inside. Footsteps. Slow. Unhurried. The door opens. And just like that, the distance between past and present disappears. He stands there. Older, yes. Time has done its work. Lines on his face. A different posture. But the core unchanged. The same calm. The same controlled expression that once sat across from detectives years ago. Recognition doesn't show immediately. But something does. A pause. Subtle. Almost invisible. But enough. Because in that pause there's awareness. Not panic. Not confusion. Awareness. As if some part of him has always known this moment might come. He doesn't run. Doesn't argue. Doesn't resist. He steps back. And lets them in. The same way investigators realize someone else once did. Inside, the space is clean.
Organized.
Minimal. Nothing out of place. No obvious signs of anything that would connect him to what they already know. But that doesn't matter anymore. Because they're not here to search for possibility. They're here with certainty. The arrest is made quietly.
No struggle.
No raised voices. Just the sound of cuffs closing around wrists that have never been restrained before. And in that moment, decades collapse into a single point. Because this isn't just an arrest. It's a rupture.
In time.
In silence. In everything that allowed him to exist undetected for so long. He's transported without incident.
Booked.
Processed. And then placed in a room. The same kind of room where years ago he walked out untouched. But this time it's different. Because this time they have something he can't explain away. DNA. Multiple cases. Connections that didn't exist before. And, most importantly,
time.
Years of it. Long enough to build something that doesn't rely on memory or chance. The interrogation begins without theatrics.
No aggressive tactics. No immediate confrontation.
Just questions. Simple. Controlled. The same kind of questions he answered before. But now the weight behind them has changed. He responds the same way.
Calm.
Measured. Careful. Acknowledges the past interaction with investigators. Remembers being questioned. Remembers the name. The situation. Nothing more. No admissions.
No sleeps.
Just control. But control has limits. And those limits begin to show when the evidence is introduced. Slowly. Deliberately. Not all at once. Because this isn't about overwhelming him. It's about watching him. Watching for change. The DNA is mentioned. Not explained in detail. Just enough. A shift.
Small.
But real. For the first time there's hesitation. Not in his words. But in the space between them. A fraction longer than before. A breath that doesn't align with the rhythm he's maintained. And that's when investigators know. They're not chasing something anymore. They're inside it. The questioning continues. Connections to other cases. Locations. Timelines. Not accusations. Just alignment. And with each piece the room changes. Not visibly, but perceptibly. Because the structure he has relied on, distance, time, absence, begins to collapse. He doesn't confess. Not directly. Not clearly. But he stops denying. And in cases like this, that's everything. Because silence, when it replaces denial, is not the same silence that existed before. It's heavier. More deliberate. More revealing. Hours pass. Then more. The conversation loops, tightens, narrows. And eventually something emerges. Not a full story. Not a clean explanation. But fragments. Carefully chosen. detached, as if he's describing something that doesn't belong to him, even though it does. He speaks of encounters, of conversations, of moments that began normally and shifted. No force, no violence, just persuasion, presence, control. He doesn't describe what happened after. Not fully, but he doesn't need to, because what he doesn't say fills the room louder than anything he could. The investigation moves quickly now. Charges begin to form, not just for one case, but for multiple, each one tied together by the same thread that once didn't exist. DNA. And the man sitting in that room no longer a shadow, no longer a name in the margins. Now something else entirely. Something real. Something accountable. And outside, the world begins to react. Quietly, at first. Then louder. Because cases like this don't stay contained. They ripple. Through communities. Through families. Through time itself. And as the news spreads, the shock isn't just about what happened. It's about how long it went unnoticed. How many years passed. How many chances were missed. How close the truth had always been without anyone seeing it clearly enough to act.
But now,
it's visible, unavoidable, and irreversible, because the silence that protected him
is gone.
And in its place is something far more powerful, the truth, or, at least, the beginning of it. The room doesn't change after the arrest. It just feels different. Not because anything physical has shifted, but because certainty has finally entered a space that had spent decades built on uncertainty. Walls that once held only questions now hold something heavier. Answers that don't arrive cleanly. Answers that resist simplicity. He sits where he has been placed. Still calm. Still controlled. But something about that control is no longer absolute. Because control only works when the unknown remains larger than the known. And now the known is expanding.
Piece by piece.
Question by question. Evidence by evidence. The interrogation resumes, not with urgency, but with structure. Investigators understand something crucial now. They don't need him to confess everything at once. They only need him to acknowledge enough for the truth to begin collapsing in on itself. They start with the DNA. Not as accusation. As fact. Multiple locations. Multiple cases. A pattern that spans years, not days. They lay it out carefully. Not aggressively. No raised voices. No pressure tactics that risk pushing him back into silence. Just sequence. Timeline. Correlation. And they watch. Because this is where most cases break open or shut down completely. At first, there's nothing. He listens. Eyes steady. Expression unchanged. As if the information belongs to someone else. But then comes the smallest shift. A blink held half a second too long. A breath that doesn't reset cleanly. And then acknowledgement. Not of guilt. Not yet. But of familiarity. He recognizes the structure of what they're presenting. Not as accusation, but as reconstruction. And that distinction matters. Because reconstruction implies memory. Not speculation. The investigators move forward. They bring in case files. Not all at once. One by one. Each disappearance laid out with clinical precision.
Dates.
Locations. Circumstances. The absence of forced entry. The lack of struggle. The silence that followed each event like a shadow that never fully detached. He watches all of it. Quietly. Until the third file. That's when something changes. Not visibly dramatic. But enough. A shift in posture. A subtle tightening in his jaw. Something internal responding to something external. And for the first time he speaks without being asked directly. Not a confession. Not an admission. A correction. This one, he says almost calmly, was not like the others. It is not what he says. It is that he says it at all. Because it breaks the structure of denial. Investigators don't react outwardly. They don't push too fast. They let the statement sit. Let it exist without interference. Because anything more could collapse it. Instead, they let silence do the work. And in that silence he continues. Not in detail. Not in narrative. But in fragments. He describes encounters, how they began, how they unfolded, not as violence, not as force, but as conversations that changed direction, moments of trust that formed too quickly, too easily. He speaks about timing, about proximity, about choice, always framed carefully, always distanced, as if he is observing rather than participating. But the investigators are not listening for innocence. They are listening for structure. And the structure is there. Consistent, repetitive, intentional. Every case follows a rhythm that matches the next. Not identical, but aligned. And that alignment is what becomes impossible to ignore. Because randomness does not repeat like this. Only design does. Outside the room, the case expands again. Now that a voice exists inside it, everything outside begins to reorganize around that voice. Old files are reopened with a different lens. Evidence that once seemed disconnected now sits in alignment, forming lines where there were only dots before. Families are contacted again, not with promises, but with updates. With acknowledgement that the silence they lived with for years is no longer intact. And the reaction is immediate. Grief, long suspended, begins to move again. Not forward, not backward, but outward, into questions that have no comforting shape. Inside the interrogation, time stretches. Hours blur. Days begin to fold into one another. He remains consistent, controlled, but not unchanged. Because consistency in the presence of undeniable evidence is no longer denial, it becomes adaptation. And investigators begin to see it. The way he chooses words carefully, the way he redirects certain questions without refusal, the way he acknowledges events without fully owning them. It is not confusion. It is management. And that realization reframes everything again. Because this is no longer just about what happened. It is about how it was sustained. How something so quiet could persist across years without interruption. At one point, a specific case file is placed in front of him, different from the others. A disappearance that triggered no headlines at the time. A woman who vanished from a similar setting. Similar lack of forced entry. Similar absence of evidence. But this one is different in tone. Because investigators now know more than they did before. They don't just present facts. They present overlap. DNA connections. Shared patterns. Geographic proximity to known movements. This time, he doesn't speak immediately. He looks at the file longer. Longer than before. And something in the room tightens. Not from fear, but from recognition. And when he finally speaks, it is quieter. This one, he says again, was the last time I stayed too long. The words land differently. Because they are not framed as denial. Not framed as confusion. They are framed as memory. Investigators do not interrupt. They let it continue. And what follows is not a confession in the traditional sense. It is something more fragmented. A breakdown of sequence without emotional anchor. Meetings. Timing. Shifts in behavior. Moments where decisions were made without force, but with consequence. He never uses the word victim. He never uses the word crime. But the absence of those words does not protect the meaning. It only exposes it further. Because what is left unsaid becomes the clearest part of the narrative. As the interrogation continues, something else becomes clear. He does not perceive himself as unpredictable. He perceives himself as consistent. And that consistency is what investigators now understand as the core of the case. Not chaos. Not impulse. But repetition with intent. Outside the room, analysts begin mapping everything again. This time with confirmation. The pattern is no longer theoretical. It is supported by presence. By admission. By alignment between physical evidence and behavioral structure. And the scope widens further. Because if the pattern is real here, it may exist elsewhere. In places not yet connected. In cases still considered closed. Or forgotten. The realization settles heavily. This is not just resolution. It is exposure. Of something that existed in parallel to ordinary life for years without intersecting it in a visible way. Inside the room, the questioning slows. Not because there is nothing left, but because everything now requires precision. Every word matters. Every hesitation matters. Every contradiction matters more than it did before. And he knows it. He adapts accordingly. But adaptation only goes so far when the structure around it has already been dismantled. And slowly, inevitably, that structure begins to give way. Not in confession. Not yet. But in fragmentation. In the loss of absolute control over narrative. Because the truth is no longer something he can shape alone. It is being reconstructed outside of him. And for the first time in decades, he is no longer the only one holding it. The silence that once protected him is no longer intact. It is breaking. And what comes through that break is no longer silence at all. It is exposure. And it is growing louder with every passing hour. The truth, once it starts to surface, doesn't behave like truth in stories. It doesn't arrive clean. It doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in fragments, uneven, incomplete, sometimes contradictory, like something that was never meant to be reconstructed in full. And yet, piece by piece, it begins to take shape anyway. Inside the interrogation room, the air feels different now. Not lighter, not heavier, just altered. As if the space itself understands that something irreversible has already happened here, even if nothing definitive has been said in the way people expect. He is still seated, still composed, but the rhythm has changed. Where there was once steady control, there is now calculation layered over something more unstable, something that appears only when silence is no longer an advantage. Investigators don't rush. They've learned that rushing collapses fragile truths. So they continue slowly, deliberately, laying out reconstructed timelines that no longer rely on memory alone, but on data, movement patterns, phone traces, forensic alignment across years and locations. And for the first time, there is no gap between what they know and what they can prove. The pattern is complete enough now that denial cannot stand on its own. But something else emerges in its place. Not confession. Not resistance. Interpretation. He begins to describe events not as isolated incidents, but as sequences. Encounters that developed with structure. Interactions that escalated not through force, but through progression. He speaks of moments of agreement, of mutual understanding, of decisions made without pressure. But the investigators are no longer listening for narrative justification. They are listening for deviation, for distance between language and reality. And that distance is everywhere. Because what he describes as alignment, the evidence describes as manipulation. What he frames as continuity, the evidence frames as repetition. And what he calls choice, the evidence calls pattern. At one point, an investigator places a single photograph on the table. Not graphic, not emotional, just procedural. A house. The exterior of a residence tied to one of the earliest cases. He studies it for a long moment, long enough that the silence begins to stretch. Then he speaks. I remember this one, he says. No emotion attached. No visible shift. Just recognition. And that recognition is more important than anything he has said so far. Because memory in cases like this is not neutral. It is anchoring. Investigators press gently, asking him to elaborate.
He does.
Not fully. Not clearly, but enough. He describes entering, not breaking in, not forcing anything. He emphasizes that, repeatedly, as if the absence of force is the defining characteristic of everything that follows. He describes conversation, trust building quickly, a sense of familiarity that he claims developed naturally, and then a shift, a point where, according to him, things continued without interruption. It is vague, deliberately so, but the structure remains consistent with other cases. And that consistency is what transforms his words from narrative into evidence. Because consistency across multiple events is no longer anecdotal. It is behavioral signature. Outside the room, analysts refine the timeline further. Every known case is now layered against his known movements. The alignment is no longer partial. It is strong enough that gaps begin to close. Entire windows of time once considered irrelevant now become critical. And in those windows, he is present more often than chance would allow. Not always directly at the scene, not always recorded, but near, adjacent, within proximity that cannot be dismissed. The realization settles across the investigation like weight spreading through a structure. This was not random, not opportunistic. It was controlled repetition. And repetition requires understanding of environment, of timing, of absence of oversight. Inside the interrogation, the tone shifts again, not dramatically, but perceptibly. Because once consistency is established, the only thing left to resolve is meaning. Investigators begin narrowing focus, not asking what happened in general terms anymore, but asking specific, anchored questions tied to known evidence points. He responds selectively. Some answers precise, others deliberately incomplete. But there is no longer total refusal. The structure of denial has already fractured, and that fracture is widening. At one point, a question is asked about the back door in the original case, the only confirmed physical anomaly from the 1987 scene. The question is simple,
Direct.
He pauses longer than usual before responding. And when he does, his answer is different from everything before. Not denial, not explanation. Something closer to acknowledgement without ownership. It was open when I arrived, he says. The room shifts, subtle, almost imperceptible, but significant, because that statement contradicts the foundational uncertainty of the original investigation. And if true, it reframes everything. If false, it reveals something else entirely. Investigators do not react outwardly. They note it. They store it. They move forward. Because this is no longer a moment of confrontation. It is a construction of inevitability. Each answer narrowing the space he can operate within. Each detail reinforcing the pattern that surrounds him. And the pattern is no longer abstract. It is cumulative. By the time hours pass into the next cycle, something unexpected happens. He stops trying to frame events in full narratives. Instead, he begins to respond in fragments. Short statements. Disconnected observations. Pieces of memory without structure. As if maintaining coherence has become too costly. And that is when investigators understand something critical. Control is not infinite, even for someone who has maintained it for decades. Especially when confronted with reconstructed reality that no longer depends on his version of events. The case files are no longer just evidence. They are anchors pulling his narrative apart from multiple directions at once. And eventually even controlled language begins to fail. Not dramatically, not in collapse, but in erosion. A gradual loss of consistency. A slow inability to maintain the same framing across repeated questions. Outside the room, the investigation expands again, this time not toward identification, but toward scope. Because if the pattern is confirmed here, it may extend further than anyone initially believed. Not just a handful of cases. Not just a series of coincidences. But a sequence spanning years that was never interrupted. And the implications of that realization are difficult to contain. Because it means silence was not accidental. It was structural. Sustained. Reinforced by absence of detection. Inside the room, the final phase of questioning begins for the day. He is still composed, still present, but no longer absolute. And when the session ends, there is no sense of resolution, only continuation. Because nothing about this case resolves in a single moment. It unfolds, layer by layer, like something that refuses to be fully exposed all at once. And as he is led away, something remains in the room. Not just evidence,
Not just statements.
but the unmistakable sense that a long-contained system has finally been breached. And what was once hidden in silence. There is a point in every long investigation where the truth stops feeling like discovery and starts feeling like impact. Not something you find, something that hits you. For this case, that point arrives not with a confession, not with a dramatic revelation, but with accumulation. Years of fragments finally aligning into something that can no longer be dismissed as coincidence, anomaly, or possibility. It is structure. And structure, once fully visible, is impossible to unsee. Inside the system, the case is no longer treated as a single disappearance. It has expanded, reclassified, rebuilt. What began as one missing person in 1987 has become a connected investigation spanning multiple jurisdictions, multiple years, multiple lives that all share the same unsettling absence of force, struggle, or explanation. And at the center of it all, one individual now in custody. But custody is not the same as conclusion. Not yet. Because answers, even when partially obtained, still need to survive scrutiny. And scrutiny in this moment is relentless. The interrogation room has changed over time, not physically but in atmosphere. What was once tension has become something heavier. Confirmation layered over uncertainty, certainty layered over unanswered gaps that still refuse to close completely. He is brought back in, again, not because there is doubt about presence, but because there is still no complete narrative that satisfies the scale of what has been uncovered. This time, the approach is different. No broad questions.
No reconstructed timelines.
Only specifics.
Names. Dates.
Places. Evidence points that now exist outside of memory and inside verified records. And with each question, the space between his responses grows slightly longer. Not dramatically, not visibly breaking, but slowing, as if the act of maintaining structure is becoming increasingly difficult. The DNA evidence is no longer theoretical. It is mapped across multiple cases.
Confirmed.
Reconfirmed. Cross-referenced. The unknown profile that once belonged to no one now belongs, without ambiguity, to a single source. And that source is sitting in front of him. He no longer denies proximity. He no longer denies contact. What remains is interpretation. And interpretation is where control begins to fail. Because interpretation belongs to the system now, not to him. At one point, a full timeline reconstruction is presented. Not verbally, visually. A mapped sequence of movements across years, layered over case locations. Red markers indicating confirmed disappearances. Blue markers indicating verified presence. Lines connecting them not as assumption, but as correlation derived from data. He watches it. For a long time. Longer than before. And for the first time, something shifts that is not tactical. It is reflective. Not emotional in the conventional sense, but destabilized recognition. Because what he is seeing is no longer isolated memory. It is pattern externalized. And once a pattern is externalized, it can no longer be controlled internally. Investigators ask him to explain gaps. He attempts. But the explanations no longer align cleanly. They fracture under comparison with evidence. He adjusts, then readjusts, then pauses longer between responses. Not refusal, not silence as strategy, but erosion. The structure he once used to maintain coherence is no longer sufficient. And slowly something changes in the tone of the room. Not accusation, not confrontation, but finality beginning to form. Because at a certain point, the purpose of questioning is no longer to discover what happened. It is to confirm what already has. And that confirmation begins to solidify across multiple fronts. Forensics, witness corroboration, historical data, geographic overlap, behavioral consistency, and most importantly, biological certainty. The DNA does not shift. It does not reinterpret. It does not negotiate. It only confirms presence. And presence, across multiple sites, over years, becomes impossible to dismiss as coincidence. At one point, he stops responding to narrative-based questions entirely. He shifts instead to short acknowledgments, occasional corrections, minimal engagement, as if full reconstruction has become too large to hold at once. And that is when investigators understand something critical. This is no longer a case of denial. It is containment, of memory, of responsibility, of scale. But containment does not stop exposure. It only delays collapse. Outside the interrogation room, the investigation has already expanded beyond its original boundaries permanently. Cold case files are reopened nationwide. Similar patterns begin to surface in places previously unrelated. Disappearances, once considered isolated, are now reevaluated through a different lens. And that lens changes everything, because patterns that were once invisible become unmistakable when viewed together. What looked like randomness was structure. What looked like silence was consistency. What looked like absence was repetition. And repetition over years is not accident. It is method. Inside the room, the final session begins without announcement. No escalation.
No teatrix.
Just continuation. He is shown one final consolidated file. Not individual cases. Not fragments. But the complete mapping of all confirmed connections. It is not presented as accusation. It is presented as conclusion. And this time, he does not attempt to reframe it.
He simply looks at it. Long.
Unmoving. And for the first time, the silence he maintains is not protective. It is absolute. Because there is nothing left to structure. Nothing left to adjust. Nothing left to reinterpret that would meaningfully change what has already been established outside of him. When he finally speaks, it is not a confession in the traditional sense. It is acknowledgement of scale, of sequence, of presence across time that cannot be separated from outcome. But even then it is incomplete, because completeness requires ownership, and ownership is the one thing still resisted. The session ends without resolution in the emotional sense, but legally it is already moving toward closure. Charges stand. Evidence holds. Patterns remain intact under scrutiny, and the case that once had no direction now has too many converging lines to ignore. Outside, the public reaction arrives in waves.
Shock.
Disbelief. Anger. Reassessment of years of silence that once protected uncertainty. Communities that lived with unanswered questions now face something different. Answers that do not resolve grief, only redefine it. Families revisit memories that were frozen for decades. Detectives reflect on the narrow margins where the case once could have gone differently. And the city itself absorbs another truth it did not expect to revisit in this form. That some cases are not lost because they are unsolvable, but because they are unseen, until something finally forces them into visibility. And once visible, they cannot be returned to silence. Back inside custody, he remains unchanged in posture, but no longer unchanged in position within the case. He is no longer an unknown, no longer a possibility, no longer a question. He is now the center of a fully reconstructed history, one that spans years of absence, movement, and repetition. And for the first time since 1987, the door is no longer open. The silence is no longer unbroken. And the case that once dissolved into nothing has finally become something that cannot disappear again. Because truth, once fully assembled, does not fade back into darkness. It stays, unmoving, unavoidable, and permanent.